Welcome to the Boots on the Ground podcast, the podcast where we explore how ERP transforms operations, streamlines production, and delivers real results in manufacturing. Whether you're running a plant, leading IT, or just trying to make sense of a digital transformation, this is where tech meets torque. Let's get into it. Welcome to the 6th episode of Boots on the Ground. Today is special because we're introducing our new co-host, Mr. Nick Rolf. Nick joins us from SolutionsX, where he's a senior account executive, and he brings more than 20 years of hands-on manufacturing experience. Throughout his career, he's helped organizations align their people, processes, and technology, and we're thrilled to have him on board. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. I'm excited to be joining the conversation today because we're talking about what it means to quote without compromising for manufacturers. If you're a manufacturer today and you're quoting in spreadsheets, a third-party product, or maybe it's a combination, you're currently compromising on your quoting process. And to help us with that conversation today, I'd like to introduce Bridget Lazlo. For over 25 years, Bridget, former CEO of Guardian Business Solutions and now Senior ERP Consultant at SolutionsX, has had the distinct pleasure of working alongside manufacturers, increasing operational efficiency, improving data accuracy, and removing barriers to productivity. We welcome Bridget to the Boots on the Ground episode.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Bridget. Good to have you. So why don't we jump right into it, Bridget? As our session today is about quoting without compromise, I want to start off with a question for you, and that is, what problems or risks do manufacturers typically face with quoting?
Well, you started out by saying that a lot of this is done in spreadsheets, right? Or third-party products and not currently within their ERP system. So I think we'll start there. Once you have it outside of your ecosystem of your let's call it your database of truth, you're compromising a lot of things, right? Your spreadsheets don't update automatically when material, labor, or overhead rates change. Users sometimes work off outdated templates potentially. It's hard to enforce standard margins. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. So the result of that is the quotes might go out with incorrect prices or margins that are lower than we would want them to be. So to repeat that, there's no connection to like actual costs. Engineers might be manually calculating BOMs, routings, material pulls, guessing on custom jobs without knowing the true cost. So you get that margin erosion, inconsistent pricing, or even lost profit. So to me, that is like one of the really big risks of having a outside of the ERP type scenario. The other connection that you're not getting is that real-time visibility into like your inventory, your lead times, your capacity loads, things of that nature, right? So sales is saying, oh, sure, we can get that done on such and such a date, and not realizing maybe they have long lead times of inventory. They might not have the capacity available. So they're over promising, and that's not a great relationship to start off with a new customer, right? So you get late deliveries. Another one, let's call it duplicate data entry, right? So even if we do overcome some of these issues that I was just speaking about, now you get the order, you got to take it, duplicate all the data into the ERP. It might go into different places, maybe the CRM and so forth. Increases your error rate. Wrong part numbers, maybe the quantity gets transposed, customer information may not come across and correctly. And we can have a lot of costly production type mistakes and a lot of wasted time, quite honestly.
Well, and maybe just to add into your point there, Bridget, I think that when we think about spreadsheets, like I just want to go back onto your point about spreadsheets, that when manufacturers rely on those tools, it becomes far too easy for somebody to accidentally delete a cell or mistype a value or overlook a formula, right? Like how many times does a formula get missed, right? And those small errors can have a big impact on the quote. And it's when I think back into the days of my manufacturing days, and I think about quoting large blocks of work or a large subassembly, right? A single miscalculation in that spreadsheet, a misformula, can throw off a lot of things, right? And I used to have an owner that said that you miss a little, you miss a lot, right? Like those are, you can make a simple mistake that's going to be pretty costly, and it's really hard to go back, or it's really tough conversations to go back to your customer and say, I made a mistake here. We got an inaccurate quote.
Well, to that point exactly, hard to track the revisions too, right? Because I'm in there, I'm making a bunch of changes. I might be changing, like you said, formulas. The revisions are, we have the final, and then we have the final, and then we have the final, version of that. And then because it's in its own, delivery system, if you will, there's no automation on approvals, for example. Like, how do I get discounts or special pricing? Uh, it might be outside that even now that could be an email. So now we got spreadsheets, we got emails. So we're exposing the company to some really inconsistent communication with the customer, especially if they're dealing with multiple of our, excuse me, account representatives or something. We're looking at it being disconnected potentially from your CRM. So now not everybody has that same visibility, or they might not have that strategic alliance with each other from person to person and how we're communicating with the customer. So it's really hard to track on follow-ups, customer interactions, and so forth. Which also gets to slowing down the turnaround time. Whereas if you have all of it compiled in one place, you're just going to have a much better experience with the customer. You're going to have more things at your fingertips. So slower quoting delivery, which we all know that can mean slower win rates. If you're not right there on top of it with the customer, you could lose to your competition because they've got a better process, a better system, for sure.
I was just going to say, and I think quote hit rate, right? Like if you have it in your quoting in a tool like your ERP, now you're able to start tracking your quote hit rate and how well are we performing on, especially when you're doing blocks of work or consistent quoting with a particular customer. So
Yeah. Well, exactly. And some other things to consider too are just the total branding. So I know in my company, and Nick, we've worked together a while, we wanted to have our branding be the same. So if they were dealing with me or with you or with someone else, it all looked transparent, right? So we had standardized quote templates, and it looked much more professional than everybody's doing it their own way. So that, I think, is a good it's a good way to start a relationship with the customers, to have that professional, uh, consistent look and feel and experience with that. So um, the only other thing I would add, though, to the risks, if we're talking about risk, because that was your initial question, right, is just the security and the control risk, where if you're having it outside of a more structured environment, sensitive pricing data could be stored in people's personal folders, their email. It's hard to restrict access, who can see or edit certain quotes, right? So your potential data loss or unauthorized access can be very impacted by those types of systems.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Glad you put that in there. That's pretty impactful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about the risks a little bit, but what are some of the advantages? Excuse me. What are some of the advantages of quoting within your ERP?
So if you're talking about quoting in the ERP, we solve a lot of these problems, right? So all the quotes are going to follow the same structure, the same logic. We don't have these disconnected tools, right? We're going to improve our accuracy and our professionalism. We have real-time costing and pricing, right? So when it's in the ERP, we're pulling current material costs, we're pulling current labor overhead rates directly from the system. Any price matrices, any customer specific pricing, margin targets, right? They're all in one place rather than in multiple places being pulled by different databases. So it's, as we call it, your database of record. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
come up multiple
mhm.
times throughout this podcast. I think on every single episode, it's just one version of the truth. So
Yes,
it's
yes, exactly.
but let's just say instead of using a spreadsheet, which technically is a third party, but what's your take on those third party quoting products? I mean, are they bad?
Yeah, so I have seen people use third-party products. One example I can think of, the customer we had was paying almost as much for their third-party quoting product as they were for their whole ERP. So it was very expensive. It was very nice. I mean, it did a lot of things, but the fact that it did not have full integration, right? So we didn't have visibility into their inventory, didn't have visibility into their, like we were talking earlier, their pricing. We didn't see good lead times. So they still weren't able to give realistic promise dates uh, to the customers. Like I said, it was a very pretty system. It was very expensive. It had some AI capabilities, but nothing that was providing the value of a full price, or as much as your ERP was. So we did end up converting them to, in this case, our ERP Sightline, and did it within that same infrastructure rather than the separate one. And so far, so good. It's a recent project we were working on. So we'll let you know. Invite me back.
There you go. Yeah, we'll have
I'll
to
give
come
you
back on this one.
the end result. But so far, they're very happy. Um, and by doing that, now they can convert, custom prospects into customers, quotes into customer orders, the quote into the bill of material, right, to make jobs. No rekeying of data. So what was originally quoted will be how it is followed through all the way to the end. We'll be able to track all the revisions and history and statuses. Um, we'll be able to also look at what was pending, what was lost, what was run, what is expired. Um, and then end of the day, the really big impact is going to be, here was what we quoted for our cost, and here was what our actual cost is. So that comparison of those details is much easier. Um, in another case, we did have a customer that had very involved spreadsheet. The owner actually had developed it. So it was a little bit protected, right? I mean, he didn't want to tell the owner, hey, this is a dumb idea, because that doesn't usually go over too well. And it was a great spreadsheet. I mean, it had a lot of complications. He did a fantastic job. The problem was all the risks that we talked about before, right? The not current pricing, the you could delete a cell. Well, he actually protected his pretty good, but there was just even understanding what it was doing behind the scenes, because it was so proprietary, if you will, in the way that he came up with his formulas and so on. Well, we went through it and figured out what he was doing, we knew that the ERP actually could do the same things, and even take it up a notch. So we built in a few of his formulas, and the platform we happen to work on allows us to do some complex calculations without doing a whole bunch of programming, if you will. And then also, we supported workflows. So in this case, they had several different approval processes that they wanted to go through before they presented it to the customer, because it's a very competitive industry and they needed to make sure, the margins were, even if you were off a little bit, even pennies in their case could have been a lot. So we did do a lot of routing approval, where engineering was looking at how they had structured the bill of material and how it was routed through the shop and what rates they were using for, pieces per hour, and excuse me, the hourly rates and the overhead and so forth. Like I said, very competitive market. So we did not want to have a lot of, too high of a margin or leave money on the table, either, right? So you had to really have that balance. So it went through a lot of approvals, did engineering, and then I went to customer service, and I went to purchasing just to make sure that the materials were right. But it all had to happen, like we were saying earlier, you got to get there fast. You can't, have this drag on for weeks. It's got to go pretty quick. So a lot of email notifications, or I should say notifications, workflow notifications through the system. So that was a really good too.
Good.
Um,
I know
go ahead.
personally, I shouldn't be allowed near a spreadsheet. I've broken plenty in my day. I'm not sure how I really passed business school because there was a lot of complex Excel work there. But it's, for someone like me, you don't want them in your spreadsheet. I can't really mess that up in the ERP. At least I can't break it. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah,
But
right.
maybe one day. But no, I think just like peace of mind on that. If you build this beautiful tool within Excel, it's great. But hey, this is already built over here with more safeguards and all these great things. So you don't have to worry about people like me.
Even when
Yeah.
I put my manufacturing hat on, like back in my day, we were, that was back in the day when we'd make access databases, right? And so there was there were times where we had some pretty elaborate customized tools made, and unfortunately sometimes you have a mastermind behind those, and then when the mastermind leaves, that leaves a gap, right? And I think that all too often in manufacturing we run to, let's just customize it, let's build a separate application, we can build something that lives outside the ERP, right? We're going to do a workaround. And unfortunately, when the person that leaves, so does all that knowledge, and then that costs a lot of time and a lot of money to unravel that code just to make simple changes in the future or maintain it, right? And so that was that. I just think back, and those are some of my lessons learned of especially when you get into these complex tools, that whether it's a spreadsheet or a customized application, you have to be thinking about, like, how am I going to support this in the long run, especially as my business grows or I need to make changes, right?
That's a really excellent observation. I had one experience where they called it Rickware, because Rick was the guy who wrote it. Uh, he ended up retiring, and then they had exactly what you said, the support issue, right? He would answer calls for a while, and then eventually he was like, "Yeah, you need to replace that." So whereas if you're using an ERP, an established ERP system, and it's integrated into the rest of your processes, you're not going to have that, because you're going to have, a company like an Infor, where, they're a big organization. If somebody retires, okay, we got documentation, we have another person who knows it, or we have a whole staff of people who know how to get it there where you need to go.
So, Bridget, when you think about the advice you'd give to manufacturers, right, and truly, there's probably some very foundational core pieces that need to be in place to quote in your ERP, what would you say, hey, these are foundational, got to have these as you're starting to plan to put your quoting into your ERP?
Yeah. So a couple things. Obviously, the first question is, does your ERP have a quoting module? Right. So, or have one available if you haven't, if it's not already included in your subscription, something that you can add on. Looking at whether or not you'd need what we call CPQ, which is configure, price, and quote, might be one of the things, which is an excellent option within an ERP where you're able to prompt a salesperson or a customer service person through a series of questions, helping them to identify how your product is built, how your product can't be built, right? So you've got that built in there. Excellent option. So I would look at that. What are your requirements? What do you need in order to do your quoting? Is it a highly specialized industry? Is it, pretty basic? You maybe just stamp some metal or something, which sounds easy, but there might be things about it that you need to really factor in, gauges and fixtures and tools, and does the module that you're looking at support all of that? And then on top of that, then you have to start looking at data, right? So what kind of data do you already have? Do you have good bills of materials? Do you have good material costs? Do you have good overheads and rates for labor and so forth? So if you were executing this, you're going to want to plan, right? So again, looking at what are the requirements that you need? Does the software you have support those requirements? If they don't, what do you need to do? Work with your partner to see if you can have the specialized needs that you might have include added, right? Do you need it all integrated into your CRM? That's within, again, that's not our topic for today, but also include that in the quoting process so you have better visibility and volumes and forecasting and all that good stuff. But so getting that ready, and then of course your project plan to include getting your people trained, and the next step would be to test your quotes against your existing methodology to make sure you're getting similar results, or even, it should be better results. Setting up those workflows and doing all of that important work that's on the front end to make sure you have a good result on the back end. And then, of course, monitoring it as you go. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Makes sense. So for someone
Yeah.
listening who's interested in this, what are the next steps?
Yeah. It's really just getting yourself properly prepared, and also taking the time you need to make sure that you're doing it right, not fast. You can achieve both if you're coming up with a good plan, but you want to make sure it's done well so that you get that, you expunge all those risks that we talked about, having that professional look and feel, not having data outside the system, not having the risks of the security of your data and so forth. So yeah, I would say those are very important.
Makes sense to me. I think that's all I had for you. It's a fun world of quoting within your ERP, I think, personally.
Oh yeah, I for sure. If as and reducing those errors, especially like for your engineers, not making them the bottleneck, having them have to re-examine things that are outside of the system when they're also keeping it up to date in the ERP. That just it wastes their time. It creates inaccuracies, that duplication that we talked about, and just so many mistakes that can happen when they're outside of the infrastructure that you have, that database of record, as we say, right?
Obviously, Bridget, we appreciate you coming in today, and we thank you for your valuable insights and just giving our audience a kind of a view into things to be thinking about strategically as they think about quoting in their ERP and what does next look like for them. So obviously, we appreciate you joining us today on this episode.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have been here.
Thanks, Bridget. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to SolutionsX's Boots on the Ground. If you've got questions or want to set up a free 30-minute consultation, just send an email to Nick Rolf at nick.rolf@solutionsx.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest ERP insights.